Hello again. This is Dr. Rob Cywes, the Carb Addiction Doc, back with another episode. You know, a lot of things enter my head because this is my space, the whole carbohydrate addiction space. And as a doctor, as a human being who has weighed 300 pounds in my life, I have tremendous insights on a daily basis and thoughts about certain things. And from time to time, I'll post some of those thoughts and some of my corrections of those thoughts on my Instagram feed. My Instagram feed is Robert Cywes, MD, Ph.D., and I'd strongly suggest that you follow me. I'll try to follow you back, but we can share ideas and share concepts that enter our heads. Recently, I posted a little thought, and it's something that is in my head all the time when I'm taking care of my patients. And the thought goes as follows: there is no holiday from carbohydrate addiction. When you take a holiday from carbohydrate addiction, it's called a relapse. And a relapse is always intentional. But the most important concept for me is that addicts are immune to risk. And I got a lot of flack. I got a lot of negative feedback or questionable feedback about that concept. And it is a critically important concept for me as it stands. Addicts are immune to risk. And here's what that means. Pretty much everybody knows that a tub of ice cream, a donut, is probably not a good idea. Everybody knows that rolling up your sleeve, putting a tourniquet on your arm, and injecting some heroin into your veins is not such a good idea. We know that smoking is not a good idea. There are very few people on the planet Earth that understand or don't understand that smoking a cigarette is not a good idea. And that includes vaping. So why do we do it? We do it because we're chasing that incredible high. We're chasing that immediate gratification and that obliteration of our emotional tension. Because we build up emotional tension and then we obliterate it with a highly, very rapidly endorphin activating drug. And we're after that hit. We're after that liberation from our emotional tension. And all we care about is the emotional tension. We human beings are genetically bound to taking care of immediate things. And we often can put to rest or not consider consequences. The consequence comes later. Every time you procrastinate, procrastination of something that's important to do is always an instant, visceral, emotional liberation, despite the harm that's going to happen down the road by not doing that thing. And if we considered the consequence of our actions, we probably wouldn't do it the way we do it. And the reason why I say addicts are immune to risk is because we believe that we are. When I eat that tub of ice cream, I don't consider the risk. In fact, I think I'm wearing my underwear on the outside and I've got a big S on my chest. I think I'm Superman and that ice cream is not going to make me fat, diabetic, or give me a heart attack. I don't consider that. When an addict is injecting heroin, they don't consider that they're going to turn blue and die. We don't use our addictive behavior to commit suicide. Sometimes we do. But if you considered the risk and then intentionally did it, that's called suicide. But addicts are not interested in dying. We're interested in the high. And we're able to make ourselves immune by concept to the risk, and therefore we do the drug. And I love that line. If you want to criticize it, please go ahead. But until you've walked in my shoes as a fat guy or anybody else that has a substance abuse problem, consider and be empathetic to how they give themselves permission to do the thing. Ask a smoker, that's disgusting. How the hell can you smoke? And they don't say, you know what? You're right, it's a bad thing. They typically come at you with venom. Why? Because what we do as addicts is we distort the reality of the harm. We trivialize it, we minimize it, we rationalize it, and we pretend it's not going to happen to us. Guess what that's called? That's called immunity. And when we've created this wonderful distorted world of immunity, then the instant high we get from the drug or doing that drug or having that behavior is absolutely fine. That's the problem with addiction and us human beings, is we're able to not consider the risk. So by definition, and you're not going to find this in medical books, you're not going to find this in medical texts, you're going to find this in every human being that has a dysfunctional way of taking care of their emotional needs. Every human being that does not have effective, diverse strategies of emotional management that come from within is going to find behaviors or substances from outside of themselves to give them that emotional reprieve in an instant. And over time, when they use that behavior in a dominant and excessive way, harm begins to happen. Bad things happen based upon the nature of the behavior of the drug. And if you ignore or distort the reality of the harm to continue the behavior, that is my definition of addiction. And that is why I am the carbohydrate addiction doctor. I am the carb addiction doc. Because I understand that, I get that. Not in some medical text, not by what a bunch of academic pundits have sat around a table and decided. No, I get it from the real world. Addiction is about doing a behavior or consuming a substance that gives you instant emotional gratification and ultimately results in harm, but you've distorted the reality of the harm to continue the relationship. And you've distorted the reality of that harm to the point that you don't even recognize that harm might happen. That is immunity to risk. Think about that as you're on your walk. Think about that as you listen to this podcast. And when you start to consider the harm, the risk, how your behavior may hurt you, and it hurts you not only directly because of the behavior or the harm that the toxin itself does, and every drug is a toxin, even though it may have some beneficial properties like carbohydrates or opioids. Ultimately, they're toxic to the human body. More importantly, what drugs do, what dysfunctional behaviors do, is they harm us psychologically. Because here's what happens. We consume something that gets us high. We do a behavior that gets us high. And we have that instant gratification, that euphoria, that relaxation. But on the back end of every one of those behaviors is negativity, harm, guilt, and most importantly, repression of connecting with the very issues that are driving those emotional needs. And that for me is such an important consideration, because in addiction management, the most important aspect to sustainability of addiction management, staying away from your drug of choice, is to develop skills and develop strategies and develop techniques whereby you can dissipate the emotional tension, but during that time component that is required from what you do to dissipate that emotion, your brain can enter a meditative space, and up from your subconscious can bubble the very, very issues that are driving the emotional tension. And if you can connect with those issues in the comfort of an endorphin activating experience, and then process and come to terms with those issues, maybe by letting go something nasty a friend of yours said to you, maybe saying, okay, I've got to sit down and figure out how I'm going to pay my taxes. Or I really want to start addressing my relationship with carbohydrates. If you can identify and process that issue and come to terms with it or develop a plan, not only have you dissipated the anxiety, the stress, the depression, the anger, the frustration, the fear, the boredom, the pleasure, but you've also figured out how to deal with the issue that's driving those emotions. And it makes you a more effective human being. And that, my friends, is how we treat addiction. Addicts will always be immune to risk. And when addicts consider the risk over the high, they begin to realize that the risk isn't worth the high, especially if we can find more effective strategies that help us to dissipate the emotions and deal with the issues. And the final comment on this is this. All behaviors, all substances that get us instantaneously high, or give us that high with huge risk attached to it, come from us externally. When we generate emotional salvation, when we generate things that make us feel good from the effort we put into them, when we generate that from within, and there's a time component attached to it, that is the most effective form of emotional salvation. And if you can become a time and effort-based person to get to do the fun things that we do, whether it's physically active, whether it's creative, whether it's spiritual, whether it's human connection, those are the arenas, my friends, that we are able to become better humans in. Addicts will always be immune to risk until they consider the risk to the point that they drop the addictive behavior. I hope you enjoyed this.